Here's a puzzle for you. How can the exact same battlefield be the site of a total, humiliating failure for an army, and then, just 11 years later, the scene of its most brilliant victory? That's the mystery we're cracking today. We're going to dive into the story of how one battle, for one small patch of desert, completely changed the course of modern warfare. So, our story kicks off with a political earthquake. It's July 1956. Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, gets up on a stage in Alexandria. He starts off kind of joking, making fun of foreign diplomats, getting the crowd laughing with them. But then his whole tone shifts. He says the name Ferdinand de Lesseps, the guy who built the Suez Canal, and that's a code word. At that exact moment, Egyptian troops move in and seize the canal. And his next words, the ones you see here, they set the entire region on a path to war. And right at the heart of the conflict that's about to erupt is this place, Abu Egila. Now, you look at a map of the Sinai Desert and it's mostly vast, empty, harsh terrain. There are very few good roads. Abu Egila sits right on the main road, the central route connecting Egypt and Israel. If you control this one intersection, you control all movement across the entire peninsula. It is, and this is no exaggeration, the key to the Sinai. So, when war finally breaks out in '56, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, they know they have to take Abu Egila. What they don't know is that they're about to walk straight into a disaster, and in the process, provide a masterclass in exactly what not to do. But here's the thing, this wasn't a straightforward war. The opening moves were actually part of this elaborate piece of political theater, a secret plot that was cooked up, not in Tel Aviv, but in a quiet suburb of Paris. It was called the Protocol of Sèvres. See, Britain and France were furious that Nasser had nationalized the canal, and they wanted an excuse to invade and take it back. So they cooked up this deal with Israel. Here's the plan. Israel attacks Egypt first. Then, Britain and France jump in, pretending to be neutral peacekeepers, and they tell both sides to back away from the canal. Of course, they know Egypt will refuse, which gives them their excuse to invade. This whole secret script meant Israel's first attack had to be kind of limited. It couldn't look like a full-scale war, and that decision totally shaped their disastrous battle plan. On top of all that political scheming, there was a huge fight happening inside the IDF itself about the right way to fight a war. The chief of staff, Moshe Dayan, was in the infantry is queen camp. He thought tanks were just too expensive, too unreliable, and should only be used to support the real heroes, the foot soldiers. But then you had guys like Brigadier General Chaim Laskov. He was all about tanks. He'd studied World War II and believed that big, concentrated groups of tanks should be the spearhead, punching way deep into enemy lines. Well, in 1956, Dayan's view was the one that won out, and that would have catastrophic consequences at Abu Agila. Okay, so look at this. This is the view from the main Egyptian defenses, which were dug into a ridge called Qutef. From up here, Egyptian gunners had a perfect, totally unobstructed view for nearly 5 kilometers. It was a kill zone, plain and simple. The whole place was a hedgehog of trenches, minefields, and bunkers, all set up to support each other. Trying to attack this thing head-on, that was basically a suicide mission. So what were the forces involved? Well, the attacking Israeli 10th Brigade was mostly infantry, just like Dayan wanted. They had artillery, but, and this is crucial, no tanks in the initial assault. Now, the Egyptians on defense, they didn't have any tanks either, but they didn't need them. They had 22 self-propelled anti-tank guns dug into perfect positions, turning that entire ridge into one giant tank killer. It was basically mobile infantry versus an immovable fortress. At the attack, oh man, it was just a catalog of errors. Instead of one big coordinated punch, units were sent in one by one. The main assault was ordered in broad daylight, right across that 5-kilometer kill zone we just talked about. When they did try to attack at night, 2 whole battalions got lost in the dark. The plan fell apart so badly that the commander of the whole front actually fired the brigade commander right there in the middle of the battle. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The IDF's own after-action report was brutally honest. This internal assessment said that the battle for Abu Agila was one of the only places where the Egyptian forces fought extremely well, and you guessed it, Israeli forces fought extremely poorly. It was a complete and undeniable failure. Humiliating. But this, right here, is where the story gets really interesting. Because what happens next isn't about finger-pointing, it's about learning. You see, the IDF didn't try to bury its failure. It put it on a table and dissected it, piece by painful piece. The first huge lesson from the '56 war was all about air power. In the years that followed, Israel made a pretty radical decision. They started pouring money into their air force. So much money, in fact, that the Israeli Air Force was getting half of the entire defense budget. The goal was simple: make absolutely sure that the next war begins with total Israeli control of the sky. With shiny new jets, like these French Mystères, the whole centerpiece of Israeli strategy changed. From now on, any future war would kick off with a massive, preemptive strike. The plan was to wipe out the enemy's air forces while their planes were still sitting on the ground. A successful ground war, they now realized, had to start in the air. And back on the ground, that big debate was finally over. The infantry-led disaster at Abu Aguila completely discredited Dayan's approach. Chaim Loskov, the guy who championed armor, he becomes chief of staff. He's followed by leaders like Israel Tal, who built the new IDF around the tank. Armor was no longer just support. It was now the decisive weapon. It was the spearhead. And this is the most crucial part. The IDF didn't just write a report and file it away in a cabinet somewhere. No. They turned their greatest failure into their most important classroom. That 1956 attack on Abu Aguila became a standard map problem at Israel's top military college. Every single year, a new class of officers would study the terrain, analyze the defenses, and try to solve the puzzle. By 1967, a whole generation of commanders knew that battlefield inside and out, without ever having set foot on it. Which brings us to June 1967, the Six-Day War. And once again, the IDF is staring down the fortress of Abu Aguila. Only this time, the man in charge is one of those students of that failure, and he has a radically different plan. That man was Brigadier General Ariel Sharon. And when he looked at the same problem that stumped the IDF in 1956, he didn't see an unbreakable wall. He saw a complex puzzle. And he knew you couldn't solve it with brute force. His solution wasn't another charge up the middle. No, it was this intricate, multi-pronged attack, a symphony of combined arms, designed to hit the Egyptians from the front, from the back, and from above, all at the same time. Sharon's plan was just breathtaking. Okay, check this out. Step 1. At night, helicopters would literally leapfrog over the front lines and drop paratroopers right on top of the Egyptian artillery to shut down their big guns. Step 2. A massive force of tanks would drive through sand dunes everyone thought were impassable, coming out of the deep desert to hit the defenses from behind. It's only then, with the artillery gone and the defenders completely confused by an attack from the rear, that the infantry would finally assault the main trenches from the front. Oh, and a fourth force would just block the roads to make sure no Egyptian reinforcements could get there. Every single piece had to work in perfect harmony. And this visual just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the 1956 plan, a simple, straight-ahead bludgeon that just shattered against the wall. On the right, Sharon's 1967 plan, a complex, elegant masterpiece that used surprise, misdirection, and coordination to take the fortress apart piece by piece. It's the difference between brute force and pure military genius. In just one night of fighting, Sharon's forces completely overran the Abu Aguila complex. The door to the rest of the Sinai was kicked wide open. The victory was so total, so decisive, that it literally became a textbook example of modern warfare studied all over the world. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's a concept called institutional learning. This wasn't just about one brilliant general having a good idea. This was about an entire organization having the courage to look its worst failure right in the eye, learn the painful lessons, and then systematically re-engineer itself, its doctrine, its weapons, its training, to make damn sure that mistake never ever happened again. The incredible victory in 1967 wasn't some kind of miracle. It was the direct, logical result of a decade of hard work, of tough questions, and of real change. The seeds of that incredible success were planted in the dirt of that humiliating defeat 11 years earlier. And it kind of leaves you with this bigger question, right? We always remember and celebrate the big victories. But this story, it makes you think. Maybe, just maybe, the most important moments in history aren't the successes themselves, but the quiet, difficult, and often painful work of learning from the failures that came before.